The Rush Limbaugh program is coming to you live from the nation's capital, Washington, D.C., with Tony Snow.
Thank you, Johnny Donovan, and welcome, America, to the Rush Limbaugh radio program. I'm Tony Snow, as Johnny mentioned, the host of Fox News Sunday and the syndicated columnist with the Detroit News and Creators Syndicate. Rush returns tomorrow, but for today, we got some good stuff to talk about because, ladies and gentlemen, the holiday season is just about to come to an end. That's right. Today is the 12th day of Christmas. Epiphany, the time in which the blinders fall away or the scales fall off or whatever, because now suddenly we have before us the prospect of good old-fashioned political races in 1998. And unlike in some recent years, political races that really do touch on things that matter to us. We stand the prospect, once again, after years of both parties trying to blur distinctions, of having a few races that lay bare the differences between Democrats and Republicans, or maybe even more generally between those who believe that the solution to America's problems lie not at home and hearth, not with you and me, but with folks here in Washington who presume they know better than we do. I refer, of course, to the announcement today by Geraldine Ferraro, late of the Clinton News Network, that she is going to run for the United States Senate position in the state of New York. Now, Ms. Ferraro did what a lot of people do in trying to make this momentous decision. She went off to her compound in the Virgin Islands, where, while the rest of us were freezing our tushes off, except for yesterday, it was nice here, Mr. Snerdley. Yesterday was wonderful on the East Coast, but while Americans were huddled against the cold, Ms. Ferraro in the Virgin Islands was thinking about the little people. In fact, probably throwing a quarter to them after they brought her a drink, right? Thank you, citizen. And after reflecting on the hardship suffered by the aforementioned little people, decided that she would run for the United States Senate against Al D'Amato, who is the Republican that Democrats love to hate. Nevertheless, let us begin. We're going to give you some of the sort of sound bites out of today's news conference because you got to get a flavor of the thing. This helps you. Well, this is going to help you get a sense of the kind of campaign they're going to have, but it also gets right to the heart of the problem Democrats face these days. You see, Democrats know that they are no longer a majority in this country. They know that they have left America behind in many ways. But there is a part of the Democratic heart and soul that simply cannot believe the Democrats are not better people in their hearts than Republicans are. And as a matter of fact, you look at a lot of Democratic campaigns, including the one Bill Clinton waged in 1996, the core assumption is that Republicans are mean, rotten, country clubbing troglodytes, which in some cases is true, but is not generically true. And therefore, if you really want to hire somebody who's of better character, hire a Democrat. Forget all those rap sheets. Don't, ignore those rap sheets. Ignore all those stories. What you really want is Democrats. They are better people because, and this is the cool thing, Democrats are better people because they believe they know what to do better than we do. If you don't believe it, let's listen to a few sound bites. First, we begin with the opening announcement by Geraldine Ferraro.
I'm here today with my family with a sense of excitement to announce my candidacy for the United States Senate.
Now, of course, that was the large crowd in raptures over the announcement. But, okay, so she makes the original announcement. Then she begins to characterize her opponent. I've told you that Al D'Amato is the person that the Democrats love to hate. So let us hear first the opening salvo against Senator Alphonse D'Amato by Geraldine Ferraro.
I believe this high office requires more than being Senator Pothole. It demands a genuine, continuing commitment to repair the holes in our social fabric and to chart a road into the future that offers all New Yorkers and all Americans the opportunity to earn a better life.
Hello. For one thing, I don't want somebody, I'm not going to elect somebody to take care of the social fabric. As far as I'm concerned, Washington's done enough along those lines. But this is what I like. I believe this high office requires being more than Senator Pothole. Now, this is coming from somebody who belongs to a political party that right now is run by Bill Clinton, who is the moral equivalent of Senator Pothole in that, Mr. Snerdley, he is constantly focusing on little stuff that people like. Now, Al D'Amato is a perfect retail politician. In many ways, the mirror image of Bill Clinton when it comes to this kind of realization. People don't trust politicians. They want to make sure they're not getting hosed. They want to make sure that they're not getting their taxes stolen. So what do you do if you're a good politician? You give back little things, little obvious things. In the president's case, it ranges from statements about school uniforms and school prayers and drive-by mastectomies and all that sort of stuff, all of which sounds good. This is a guy who's obviously listening to folks and therefore doing some of the people's bidding. That's exactly what Al D'Amato does. This is a guy who fixes potholes, which, by the way, does not happen in our nation's capital. I came by, I was thinking about that today when I was coming over from my Fox News studio. I mean, I have seen, smaller comet craters than some of the things that you have here in Washington, D.C. There's nothing wrong, folks, with fixing potholes. By the way, we wanted to get Al D'Amato on here, but of course, like any good New York Republican, he's running to the left, so he doesn't want to do it. Nevertheless, it is important to make the point that notice the nickname, Senator Pothole. That's important because the very next little soundbite you're going to hear is Geraldine Ferraro saying that she is going to run a perfectly nice campaign. And here we go.
Take a look at, for instance, the Torricelli race, where indeed, we are here in New York. We got hit by every one of those negative ads that were flung at Torricelli, and he did very well. In fact, what he did was he won. Despite that, the liberal attack was what was attempted by the Republicans in the national election against Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton, people turned around and they've looked at all this stuff. They've looked at the personal attacks. They've looked at the liberal labels. They've looked at all this other garbage. And they've turned around and said, this man's done a good job. And his approval rating is right up there. And the voters are not interested. So if the Republicans want to do that, fine, do it. The people of this state, I'm sure, are going to turn around and say, enough already.
Well, this is a perfect case of trying to insulate yourself from obvious criticism about the husband's, all the stuff that got Geraldine Ferraro in trouble in 1984 when she was Walter Mondale's running mate. It's still there. Here you have somebody living a life of privilege, claiming to be working earnestly on behalf of the embattled classes. And by the way, just because you have some money, just because people have worked up, it doesn't mean that they don't have some sympathy. So I don't want to stress the point too much. But look, here's somebody who has personal crises and history with her husband, with her son, and somebody who is therefore going to cast everything, including, this is what's really fun, including a mention of the L word, that she's liberal. That is going to be seen as a hateful, negative attack. No, it's the truth. Come on. If you're going to run around and say, we need more social spending, we need to mend the frayed social fabric with the greenbacks, with the money of hardworking Americans, and somebody calls that liberal, that is not a hateful attack. That's truthful. Furthermore, it takes a lot of gall to say that Bob Torricelli's race, when Torricelli was running for you talk about a negative race. Torricelli spent millions of dollars. He had some of the very best campaign advisors giving him wonderful, hateful ads that he could fling back at Republicans. This is a guy who won because he outspent and out-mudslung the Republicans in that particular race. Let's face it. Anybody who has a record is a target in politics. You're going to have negative campaigning. I'll tell you why. If you have a difference with somebody's record, you're not going to say, oh, by the way, I disagree, but that doesn't mean they're not a nice person. Of course, you want people to focus on those disagreements. That's what negative advertising in many ways is all about. The notion that somehow that is garbage. The other thing I like, and this is a tactic that Bill Clinton employs all the time, is something that Geraldine Ferraro is also used today, which is the idea of going out, flinging mud against your opponents, and also, by the way, insinuating that anything they say about you is motivated by avarice and evil and hatred. In other words, you fling mud all over them. And as soon as you're done saying that, you get up and say, and by the way, I promise to run a campaign of principle, and I hope everybody else will do the same. Let's hear the Geraldine Ferraro version of that promise.
I will commit to you right now that I will personally not engage in negative campaigning in this campaign, this primary, not negative personal campaigning, and would be delighted if Mark Green and Chuck Schumer agreed with me in that pledge. If the three of us can do that, if we can run an issues-oriented campaign, looking at both of the three of us, at our records on issues when Chuck and I were in the Congress and Mark doing the work that he's doing.
Come on,
if we can differentiate between where we are on the issues, differentiate between our experience, and bring the issues to the public, I make an absolute commitment as I stand before you that that's the kind of campaign I will run.
I don't know what that means. It sounds like a League of Women Voters debate. It would be the dullest thing on the face of the earth. Chuck Schumer has $8 million, and he's got $8 million in his war chest already. This is a guy, Mark Green, who's a liberal who has made a living in recent years of getting hammered in marquee elections because he's even too liberal for the electorate in New York. He's got $2.5 million. So right now you have opponents of Geraldine Ferraro, unless they can make an offer so that these people do not for some reason run. They got $10.5 million right now for that Democratic primary for running against Geraldine Ferraro. And I can guarantee you they're not going to have unilateral disarmament. And you're right. Chuck Schumer will take a look at Geraldine Ferraro's record. He will also take a look at the election results in 1984, in which, if memory serves, they won one state. This is not correct. Yes, the state of Minnesota and the District of Columbia. That's it. I mean, it's the biggest pasting in American electoral history. That might come up as well. Now, you may call that negative campaigning, but what happens in any political campaign is that you try to strip the bark off somebody so that you get two things with absolute crystal clarity. Number one is a vision of what kind of person this really is, and number two, a sense of what they're going to do if they get in office. That's what elections are all about. We got a lot to cover today. Give us a call, 1-800-282-2882, and I'll be back right after these messages.
You're listening to the EIB Network.
We're back with your calls on America's most influential and important radio show, the Rush Limbaugh radio program. I'm Tony Snow, the host of Fox News Sunday, syndicated columnist with the Detroit News and Creator Syndicate, filling in today. Give me a call, 1-800-282-2882. We go to Schenectady, New York. Dave, welcome.
Hi, good afternoon, Tony.
Good afternoon.
A lot of dittos to you from me and the folks at Town Hall. We're excited that you're on taking place for Rush today. But I got to ask you something. As far as things go with this woman, besides having a grating voice that I almost just can't stand listening to, what is she going to do? What is she going to offer us that's new? I mean, she's going to run a golden oldie liberal campaign.
Yeah.
I mean, they come out, they have a unique knack of saying, you're terrible, you're awful, you're so mean, and they come out with unbelievably hateful things, and then also try to come off as the victim at the same time.
Well, that's right.
So what is she going to offer us new?
Well, no, she'll offer you much more of the same. Al D'Amato, the vicious Al D'Amato. I am going to be fascinated, by the way, and I'm glad you raised this point. I'm going to be fascinated to see whether, in her pledge not to engage in negative campaigning, she doesn't try to bring up an investigation against D'Amato's brother, because for years, Democrats fed off of that. They insinuated that Al D'Amato was all mobbed up because
Well, I have a question for you on that, though. If you think about it, notice the words that she says. There's one thing that I have learned in politics over the year, especially in debating on Town Hall, on the World Wide Web, and other things that Democrats love to do, is they carefully choose their words. She said that she personally would not engage in this. That doesn't mean that her people or the staff of the campaign won't.
Bingo.
That doesn't mean that the commercials won't come out and say that. That doesn't mean that she won't have beautiful little children all of a sudden morphing into terrible-looking situations, starving on the fields of Africa, all because of D'Amato pictures done by her staff.
No, that's absolutely right, or by advertisers, and I'm glad you pointed that out, because that always happens in politics. Somebody throws in, always look for that adjective. If you got a qualifier in there, you know somebody's already building in an escape hatch. And there is no way that she or anybody else on the Democratic side is going to run anything but a negative campaign against D'Amato. Think about it. D'Amato is on the right side of a lot of issues as far as New York voters are concerned.
Yeah, he's kind of the Jesse Helms of the North.
Yeah, absolutely. Perfect. Because what he does is he stays in touch with the electorate, and he does very well upstate, which, of course, is highly Republican. And what he tries to do is to look at New York City and find out ways to get enough votes there so that a Democrat can't roll up an unbeatable advantage within the 5 boroughs of New York City.
Well, I just don't think she's going to have that great a chance. She's going to come off as a demagogue. Again, like I said, I think she's kind of grating to listen to when she gets off on her tangents of how terrible somebody else is and how great her and her party is. You know, quite frankly, on what moral authority does she come in with her party? To say that they're somehow better.
That's why I think it's going to be very interesting. You know, nobody is better at playing the moral card than Chuck Schumer. Right?
And yet she's got to go in and fight against him as well, does she not?
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, he is going to be a tough competitor. For those of you who don't know, Chuck Schumer is one of the most liberal members of Congress. He's from New York City. But, man, he is a tough fighter. This is a guy who gives no quarter, who uses every rhetorical trick in the bag, who is an absolute committed liberal, is unapologetic about it. This is a guy who if, somebody's going to call him a liberal, he's not going to whine about it and say it's negative. He's going to say, yeah, you're right, I am a liberal. And I believe in this, this, and this. So I think Geraldine Ferraro's biggest nightmare right now is not Al D'Amato. It is Charlie Schumer. And it's going to be very interesting to me to see how she weathers that, especially with this pledge, quote, not to, quote, personally engage in negative attacks against somebody else. Dave, thanks so much for the call. Let's go to Southington, Connecticut. And Jim, welcome, and thanks for waiting.
Dittos to you, Tony.
Thanks.
How you doing today?
Okay.
I saw something in the newspaper that raised my ire a little bit, and maybe I was hoping you could explain it to me. It seems that the Treasury Secretary of the United States seems to think that it's a bad idea that I keep more of my money, and he labeled any potential tax cut as dangerous on the front page of the USA Today. If that doesn't just encapsulate the arrogance to which Rush refers to daily, as well as USA Today to perpetuate such a ridiculous notion.
By the way, don't single out USA Today. It's on the front of every newspaper in America today. Bob Rubin was on a couple of Sunday shows yesterday. And what he said was he doesn't think, we've got to look at the deficit, he said, and we got to be responsible about it, and therefore we can't spend the money. Don't you love this? And I know Rush talks about it all the time. The notion that somehow you're spending money on tax cuts.
That summarizes what the Democratic Party is all about.
Yes.
It's dangerous for me to keep my money.
Well, yeah, and in a certain sense it is, because you starve the beast if you get your own money. Ladies and gentlemen, federal taxes last year took more of your money and my money than at any time since World War II. We have the biggest tax burden we have ever had in peacetime. Of course, taxes are a potent issue. Now, it doesn't have as much sting right now, perhaps because the economy is doing well, and Democrats, and especially the White House, are counting on it. But Robert Rubin's argument, it's not new, that somehow it is dangerous for you and me to keep our money. It's just an outrage. It's crazy. Because any economy moves forward on the basis of the skill and the ingenuity and the hard work and grit of real people, and not the fact that somebody can make sure that the Federal Emergency Management Administration has enough money to keep the water cooler at the proper temperature someplace down in Dallas. That is not the way you set priorities in a free society.
Tony, he knows how to spend your money better than you do, doesn't he?
Well, he probably does, as a matter of fact. Rubin, of course, is a former partner at Which one? Which of the investment houses?
Sachs.
Goldman Sachs. You know, I think he made $24 million a year before he came into the administration.
Well, the bureaucrats know how to spend your money better than you do, because you're an idiot. You don't know how to spend your own paycheck, Tony.
Well, precisely. So I think what is happening is the Clinton administration right now is trying to brand Republicans as irresponsible for talking about tax cuts. And some Republicans, by the way, are falling into the trap, including John Kasich. I want to talk later in the program about the fact that we're going to have a big fight over tax cuts. And what Republicans ought to keep in mind is that the administration, while talking about financial responsibility, is busy creating a whole lot of spending programs it thinks it can use to buy votes. So happy. Welcome back to the Rush Limbaugh radio program. I'm Tony Snow, filling in today for Rush. Give us a call, 1-800-282-2882. We go to Charlotte, North Carolina. Mike, welcome to the show.
Hi, Tony. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I think that the Republicans, and I am a Republican, if I can make that confession, I really don't think they should pursue the tax cuts at this particular time. I think they ought to use this as an opportunity to say to the American people, look, we have a $5 trillion debt. We need to work on freezing spending at least and try to cut it back to 1995 levels and then cut it back to 1990 levels. I think that's, I think the American people would buy that much more quickly than they're going to buy, well, we ought to have tax cuts.
Well, Mike, here's a question.
And I'm not against tax cuts, believe me.
Well, I know you're not. As a matter of fact, I want anybody who is against receiving a tax cut personally to call me today. I want to hear how many people just personally oppose a tax cut for themselves. But let me point out something. The moment you start talking about freezing spending or doing any of that other stuff, you get into the whole, current services baseline problem that the Russians talked about before, which is there's a fiction in budgeting that the budget automatically increases just the way the sun rises every morning, and that if it doesn't grow as much as somebody projects, then suddenly it's a budget cut. And so you will have stories of draconian budget cuts in vital social programs and frayed social safety net and all that stuff. How would you suggest the Republicans deal with that argument?
Well, I would say they're going to have to change, the terminology that we use to deal with, these factors. I mean, obviously, that's just a lot of smoke and mirrors. And they've got to get rid of all those accounting gimmicks and smoke and mirror terminology and re-educate the American people. I mean, it's one thing.
Look, you are a man of great faith. And because I'll tell you, I've seen Republicans try this time and time again, and they always sound like snarling, mean-spirited accountants. We got to cut this. We got to be fiscally responsible. And the fact is, all of the things you talked about, the $5 trillion national debt and freezing spending and going back to certain levels, that is so abstract. I mean, ask your neighbor if, number one, they understand the concept, and number two, if they seriously think for one moment any Congress would do it. Do you actually think Congress, having said it would freeze spending, would even do it for 1 year?
Well, their track record would indicate that they wouldn't. But, we keep trying to get people in there who are going to be men of their word with integrity, and we keep trying. I mean, we got to keep trying.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely right. Well, Mike, I'm glad you raised the point, and I was going to talk about this later, but I'll do it right now. Today, Mr. Newt got out and gave his vision speech, his I Have a Dream speech for this year, sort of the latest version. Normally, Newt speaks. I once made this point on the air, and somebody thought I was insinuating that Newt is satanic. I was not. He usually gives 5-point plans. This year, he's whittled it down to 4. He gave an impromptu speech at the Cobb County Chamber of Commerce, I believe it was, back in Georgia. Yeah, it was the Cobb County Chamber of Commerce. Unfortunately, he doesn't speak off of text, so we tried to call his office today. They don't have transcripts ready. Nevertheless, it's kind of the familiar litany. He wants to have a drug-free America. He wants to improve education, so there's a lot of choice talk in. Protect Americans' retirements, basically, the sort of Steve Forbes approach. And finally, to limit taxes at all levels of government to 25%. Now, there's not a portion of this with which I disagree. I agree with every single part of it. However, the way it is phrased is designed to make everybody think, what a wonderful guy he is. It's designed to exalt the politician. And this is something this is an argument I have had with Republican lawmakers for a long time. They end up, I don't know if they understand it, but they end up almost sounding like socialists, which is, we're in charge, we're going to make your life better, sit back, you'll enjoy it. Trust us, you'll enjoy it. Here's an argument I would like somebody to make just once on taxes. And the virtue of the argument I'm about to make is that it hits people where they really live. It talks about their actual lives. Democrats are great at this. Bill Clinton is absolutely unchallenged when it comes to talking about the aches and pains and tweaks and things that affect us all. He can paint a word picture that makes you think in a moment, yeah, he gets it. How do he know that? Has he been looking at our dining room table? Has he heard the conversations we've been having? How does he know? You almost never get that feeling when you hear a Republican, because they're talking in great, grand, almost academic terms. Here's the argument I wish I could hear one Republican make once on taxes. What happens, ladies and gentlemen, when taxes increase? Do your bills go down? No. Do your obligations go down? No. Do your savings plans go down? No. What happens? Excuse the coughing. I'm a victim of passive pollen. What happens when taxes go up is that most of us respond in the very predictable way. We want to get our income back up to where it was, so we work longer. Now, I don't have any problem with paying taxes to help somebody out. We as Americans are a generous people. And if I thought every penny of my tax money was going to some program that was going to feed the poor and educate those who are most in need and so on, we would do this without, I certainly would do it without any grudge. I wouldn't begrudge any of that money. But the fact is, right now, when the government raises taxes, it does so for no discernible effect. But what happens to me is I got to work longer. That means there are times when I don't get at home in time for dinner with my family. I don't get to read the nighttime stories to my kids. Now, as I said before, I don't mind if they take their money, but when they start taking time with my family, they have suddenly robbed me of the single most important thing in my life. They've taken my kids from me. They've taken my wife from me. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the sin of taxes. It is not the money, it's the time. It is absolutely the time. I'm sorry, but something really weird has just happened to my headset. Do you hear something? I'm going to keep talking. But the thing that really ticks me off is that I have stolen from me the very most important thing in my life, which is my family. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you're going to talk about something important, if you're going to talk about politics, talk about the way people actually live. Do not waste their time by talking about abstractions that have nothing to do, that have absolutely no appeal to them. At any rate, I'm going to take a quick break right now. We will be back with more of your calls. And by the way, I think we've got somebody who doesn't want a tax cut. So we'll hear from him as well. Stay with us.
You're listening to the EIB Network.
Well, I'm back, and the good news is I'm not hearing the funny voices anymore. So welcome to the Rush Limbaugh radio program. I'm Tony Snow, filling in today for Rush. He returns tomorrow after a long vacation. As a matter of fact, the staff in New York is already on DEFCON 3, scurrying about, throwing off all of that vacation frivolity and ready for the master to return. But for today, we're taking your calls, 1-800-282-2882, when we go to Greensboro, North Carolina. David, welcome.
Hi, Tony. Thank you. I just like to make a comment on, you had a previous caller that said that he didn't want a tax cut, that he thinks we should pay off the national debt, and I absolutely agree with him. His second point was he talked about freezing spending, which I don't think is a possibility, and I don't think you could sell it just because of the way it sounds and the reaction you're going to get from the liberal side of the thing. But I think you could possibly begin to sell what President Bush suggested, and I'm not sure, but maybe President Reagan made the suggestion initially, and that is to tie the increase in spending to the rate of inflation at least, and make it take just an act of Congress to increase any individual budget by more than that. And I think the problem is that number one, the Republicans have a horrible marketing group, if you can call it that. But when you listen to the Democrats and the liberals talk about the social programs and the entitlements and those kinds of things and budget and dollars, everybody seems to hear that and think of, you're taking money out of people's hands, you're taking away health care, you're taking away food stamps. But the thing that the Republicans have done a horrible job is if you look at the budget, the huge majority of money is not spent on people, it's spent on salaries.
Yes, absolutely. That's a brilliant and a very important point, David, because the key to the liberal argument is that somehow you are hurting somebody when you keep your money.
Yeah.
Or that you're hurting yourself when you keep your money. That somehow Republicans or also, look, there are a lot of tax-cutting Democrats, that anybody who wants to cut taxes is really out to hurt you. Well, you like a pay raise, right?
Right.
Well, think of a tax increase as a federally mandated pay cut.
Yeah.
I mean, what happens is when you cut taxes, you give people their money back. So, I could not agree more strongly with your insight that, again, Republicans keep talking like these sort of humorless civics teachers, rather than talking about human lives and human faces and human experiences. And also, by the way, coming up with the kind of good anecdotes that Reagan used to have to explain kind of the silliness of a lot of federal programs that presume to do great things and do not. There is nothing better than laughter when it comes to stealing the legitimacy from a program that doesn't deserve our money, our time, our attention, and so on. There's got to be a debate about government, folks. We have been Americans have been sort of bobbing along for years saying, well, we're going to hand it off to Uncle Sam. We'll hand our kids off to Uncle Sam. We'll hand off our streets to Uncle Sam. We'll hand off our lives and fortunes to Uncle Sam. And we find after a while that we are unhappy when suddenly people don't treat us like humans anymore, but instead just as cash cows. Well, what do you expect? What do you expect when you hand your destiny over to somebody else? I've said this before. Ross Perot got 20% of the vote in 1992 simply because he said, it's your government, take it back. And he was right. It is our government. And that's what the debate is about. That is what the debate is about. Bill Clinton a few years ago said, he's not against government. That's fine. But the central question in American politics is, who trusts the people? It's a government of, by, and for the people. Who trusts you? Who trusts you to figure out, what your kids should be getting in school and what they shouldn't? Who trusts you to make a decision about doctors? Who trusts you to make the right decisions about how to spend your money or save it or invest it? Who trusts you? And in some cases, it's neither party, by the way. But for any government that eventually relies on the hard work and the sacrifice and the consent of the governed, if you don't trust the folks, sooner or later, they're going to get ticked off about it. Let's go to Tacoma, Washington. Pat, thanks for waiting. You're on the air.
Hello, Tony. Nice to speak with you.
Thanks. Nice speaking to you.
Well, what I'm calling about is Geraldine. She made an even more obvious statement than she personally won't do this or that when she used just the blatant one of if. If they do this, then I won't. If they do that, then I won't. And it just jumped out at me that, right there is her escape hatch. Because say, well, they're not doing it, so I don't have to abide by it either.
Well, but, the mere statement, if they do this and if they do, that's an insult in and of itself.
Mm-hmm. It's assuming that, of course, they probably will.
Well, it's not only, it's accusing them of having bad hearts and bad motives.
Mm-hmm. Right. And she was recently on Jeopardy, and an incredibly ignorant person when she was being asked questions even about government issues. I just sat there just flabbergasted. I thought, and she wants to rule?
Well, I'm not sure that I would count Jeopardy expertise as one of the key things. I'm not sure, but you're right that there is, what's happening in the Ferraro race is that she is well known by virtue of having been put on the ticket in 1984, by virtue of having been on Crossfire. And so a lot of people know her name, and immediately they say, well, I seem to like her. What will happen? I guarantee you, throughout this entire primary process, and if she wins the primary and the